When you're drafting, you sure don't have a lot of time.
I wish it wasn't all the same deck.
Benefit for the community.
He would be surprised if there were more than 250 play sets in circulation.
You actually have to figure out what everyone else is going to be anticipating.
The conflict's escalating. It's the besiege happening, the war is starting. And this set has half Mirrodin, half Phyrexian.
Grasp of Darkness is 2 black mana for an instant to give target creature -4/-4 until end of turn.
I'm just excited just to open the packs and just try to build a deck.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Deck. I'm Steve McCarthy.
And I'm Jack Grannan, and today we're going to be talking about the recent bannings of Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic. So, how do you feel about that?
Personally, I'm kind of happy, I must admit. I didn't play during Zendikar, so I don't actually have any Jaces, and I'm glad not to have to invest in those anymore.
I know you being a rogue player, the type of guy that doesn't like to play with the best decks, you always like it when those decks tend to fall, and obviously when the cards get banned, that tends to happen.
Yeah, I like the fact that you can now innovate in this the new standard. Like, you don't have to worry about creatures not passing the Jace test, and you don't have to worry about having a 4/4 like Vigilance Lifelink attacking you like on turn 3.
Right, and I think that's the biggest thing that kind of held people back, and why people they were pushing for this ban, is like it really just stopped people from being innovative. I'm kind of one of the proponents that the deck was fine, not fine, but the format was good in my mind. It was skill intensive, the good players were winning, and in my mind that's what I want. I don't want a ton of variance, and I'm also the type of guy that likes playing blue cards, so I was totally fine with it.
Yeah.
However, people, they like bringing their own homebrews, and they don't like being trounced by turn 2 Stoneforge, turn 4 Jace, whatever, So, I can definitely see that point.
Yeah. It's just nice that like people are allowed to do that now. I think one of the issues though with Caw-Blade was that because the deck was so good and the game was so skill intensive, like where you couldn't bring anything else, it sort of turned into like chess, where the best player pretty much always wins. And
yeah,
so
we've heard that analogy a lot actually, and like, I don't know, I think it's kind of an interesting argument. Like, is that really such a bad thing? But, clearly the masses have spoken. There's, 70-man PTQs for the first time in a long while. And, clearly this is not what people want. They like to be able to bring their own stuff. They like it when there's a little bit of variance involved. And, obviously there's still variance when the Caw-Blade mirrors. But, people just got tired of that. And, it was only going to be another 3 months. But I guess that just, wasn't good enough for them. I'm personally kind of surprised that they did this, because this is the first banning in the standard since 5 years ago, I think. Old Mirrodin, back when Ravager Affinity was a popular deck. And it just, kind of surprised me that 3 months before these cards are going to rotate out of standard, that they decide to ban them.
Yeah, it seems a little, like, honestly a little late, but at the same time, I mean, like you said, when people stop showing up to play, then you have a problem.
Yeah.
And I guess they felt they finally needed to fix it with the ridiculous, like, Jace was in 88% of the...
I think it was like 80-ish, but
80 something percent of the GP decks, the day 2, like, just a ridiculous
Stoneforge
number.
up to like 70%, pretty close in value there.
Yeah.
Something I'm kind of curious about, and just get your opinion. I personally was of the opinion they should ban Stoneforge and keep Jace. And, obviously we know they're both banned, but I think a lot of people had that opinion. What do you think about that?
I mean, Jace and Stoneforge, like, Stoneforge sort of pushed Caw-Blade over the top, especially with Batterskull being printed. But Jace was just, it hurt the game in the sense that you couldn't innovate. You couldn't play creatures like Phyrexian Obliterator or even Baneslayer Angel, like a 5/5 lifelink like creature that's for 5 with flying. Like, it has evasion. It's just ridiculous. Like, you can't play it because, there's a strictly better card coming down a turn earlier that'll just make it irrelevant. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, and when the best, like Blue Manji, a completely like green aggro deck that has a little bit of blue in there, purely to play Jace, like, it becomes the best control card, the best aggro card, like, just the best card. So I think Jace being banned was actually good for opening up the format even wider than just banning Stoneforge would have done.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I think the format when Jace came out was really healthy with Jund. In the sense that Jace was balanced. He wasn't played in every deck. Jund was the most predominant deck, and Jund was pretty good against Jace decks, so there was a lot less of that. And then we saw Jace in a couple other decks like Mythic, but it was more of a 2-of. He wasn't a 4-of, you just slammed in every deck. But I think as the format evolved and people began playing a lot more, they realized, I might as well just have 4 Jace in every deck. And when it gets to that point, it's, yeah, I can see it being pretty degenerate, and yeah, I guess I admit he had to go. And your point about, invalidating a lot of creatures is another good point, because we see cards like that all the time. Cards come out like Abyssal Persecutor, Phyrexian Obliterator, Hero Bladehold, and people get all excited about these cards. They're like, oh, this card's awesome, you attack with this once, it's awesome. You're going to get this awesome advantage, and you're probably going to win the game. Problem is, Jace just bounces him, whatever, the card sucks.
Yeah.
So, I definitely agree with you there. And while I'm sad to see him go, as an owner of 4 Jaces, I'm not too depressed about it. I'm looking forward to innovating again in Standard. I think Jace is still going to hold its value, as well as Stoneforge, actually.
Yeah.
In fact, yeah, you want to just talk about that? How do you think, those cards are going to still affect other formats?
Well, obviously, I mean, Jace and Stoneforge, like, you can still play essentially Cobblade minus the Squadron Hawks in Legacy. It's a deck, it's just blue-white control. You play Stoneforge, you play Jace the Mind Sculptor, instead of Dismember, you have Swords to Plowshares. Instead of, all those weird, like Scars Duels and stuff, you have Tundras and Fetch Lands that are on color. And it's just almost exactly the same deck. I mean, you can splash black for Dark Confidant, because you're going to be gaining so much life from Batterskull anyway, but like, it's essentially the same deck, so if you want to play it in Legacy, you can still do that pretty easily, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, because I remember going through some of these Star City game events, or the one that comes to mind is the Indie one with the Invitational, where you have half Standard, half Legacy, and we see players like Edgar Flores playing Callblade in Standard, not surprisingly, and then we look at his Legacy deck, and it's Callblade, it's the same thing, except a Legacy mana base, and a couple other metagame choices, and like you said, Swords of Plowshares. But other than that, you got your Stoneforge, you got your Batterskull, and you got your Jace. So it's like, is this deck so good that we're just taking all the cards from Standard and playing them in Legacy? Like, this is supposed to be a format of every card available in Magic, and we're playing a Standard deck.
Yeah, I agree. So when you have a Standard deck that essentially becomes a Legacy deck, just like the original Affinity is a Legacy deck, then it's probably time something needs to change, because anytime there's a Standard deck that becomes exactly, almost verbatim a Legacy deck, then it's a little too powerful for the Standard format.
Yeah, that seems about right.
So now that they're gone, let's talk about what you can actually do in Standard now.
Yeah, it's an open format again. People get to innovate. People get to bring out cards that were previously unplayable due to Jace and/or Stoneforge, or just the deck in general just being ridiculous. So, the first things that come to my mind are, obviously Valakut, Splinter Twin decks that were already kind of in the format. I think Jace, or just the Cobblade deck in general, held Valakut back from being competitive, because it was really solid before that. Yeah. Back, States last year, and it was really prevalent. And so I can definitely see that one being at the forefront, kind of top of the curve here to start out.
I agree. You also have decks like Tezzeret, which were like Brian Kibler was playing a little bit, where you have a really powerful, essentially, engine to gain card advantage through Tezzeret's +1 ability, and just really good ways to. I mean, a lot of artifacts are pretty effective. Tumble Magnet against Valakut's not bad if you can survive the initial trigger of Primeval Titan coming into play, and you have just really effective cards that you can play and. For the current metagame, especially when decks are no longer going to be packing main deck Artifact Hate for Batterskull. So Tezzeret, I definitely could see being another strong deck in the new Standard. Yeah,
on that note, I've been thinking about it, and there were some fringe decks earlier before these whole bannings happened with Korath the Forge Master and a Tezzeret style deck. And basically the deck has a lot of the problems that it had before are gone. Jace bouncing your Korath the Forge Master, your 5-drop that you need to untap with, failed the Jace test, so to speak. Like you said, you're not running as much main deck artifact removal. So, or any, I would imagine people aren't going to be running any to start. And so this type of deck where you're playing Tezzerets, you're playing Forge Masters, you're tutoring up.
Blightsteel Colossus.
Yeah, Blightsteel Colossus, you get to play that guy, you get to play Mirror Battlesphere.
He failed the Jace test pretty hard.
He did, yeah. And on that note, we might even see decks like Shape Anew, because people love playing Polymorph, and Shape Anew is just the new form of that.
Yeah. And then you're gonna have like, I bet, fringe strategies that'll now be like slightly viable. Like Birthing Pod, I could see being a tier 2 deck.
Yeah, Birthing Pod,
You just gain massive
Right.
card advantage over using comes into play or leaves play triggers with a bunch of different creatures. And I mean, Toper Orb actually could be a big hindrance for that deck, but now that Toper Orb's actually playable as a sort of hindrance to random fringe strategies as well. But I mean, it's a strong, like, gaining the ability to get a bunch of card advantage off of comes into play abilities, like, you know, gaining lands, or then, I mean, even maybe like Tuk Tuk, the Explorer, like gaining a 5/5 golem. It's really strong and really hard to deal with if you don't have just a Planeswalker that can bounce whatever creature just came into play anyway. And then,
I actually read an article today about a Birthing Pod type deck with, you know, cards like Tuk Tuk the Explorer, Acidic Slime, Precursor Golem, and it also ran the Splinter Twin combo. It ran 3 Deceiver Exarchs and 4 Splinter Twins, as opposed to the usual 4 Exarch and 3 Splinter Twin, because you can tutor up your Splinter Twin. It's running Fauna Shaman too, so you have both Birthing Pod and Fauna Shaman to kind of be your toolbox.
Yeah.
And it ran, you know, Birds, Lotus Cobra to accelerate you. And the deck actually seemed pretty solid. Again, you're not playing around Jace, you're not playing around artifact removal, which is kind of what, you know, Birthing Pod was an artifact that was just sort of held it back when there was much more powerful things to be doing in Standard before. And so decks like that, I think you'll actually have a shot now, which is pretty cool.
yeah. And I actually think the strongest like Exarch Twin decks will be decks that don't use it as their primary strategy, like just solid creature-based decks. Like you even mentioned Valakut. If you just splash an island, or people will be playing Spreading Seas now, so they can just, you can get your blue source to get Exarch into play and then just win off of a Splinter Twin that they might not be expecting.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems so easy. You add 1 island, you have all this mana fixing. Like you said, I think Spreading Seas is going to come back, which is one of my favorite cards. So I'm pretty excited. So yeah, I think that deck is going to be awesome. You know, it's not going to have preordains or whatever to find your combo pieces, but you know, if you draw them, great. If not, you still have your main plan of just Valakuting them out.
Yeah.
And I guess on that note, on the note of Spreading Seas, I think blue-white control, just the traditional blue-white with, you know, Spreading Seas, potentially Wall of Omens if aggro decks come back, maybe seeing Venser, Elspeth.
Venser. I really wish Venser was around, because he's just, it's such a cool ability, especially like even with, you know, Spreading Seas and Wall of Omens. Like, he's a really neat Planeswalker, and he didn't see any play because he's not Jace, so why would you play him?
Definitely one of those cards people always wanted to play with, but it was never quite good enough.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that'll be really big as soon as the transition happens will be like mono red and other like really aggressive strategies, because you don't know what the control deck is anymore. So the best way to kill somebody is just use incredibly efficient like burn spells and creatures. And especially with M12's addition to like mono red, I think that'll be a strong deck. Now that you can actually play Hero Bladehold, like White Weenie could be really powerful.
Yeah.
And maybe even like Piersteel Paladin, which was big in the Scars block. So decks like that, maybe even Mono Black. Like Mono Black, they've been printing amazing cards for.
Oh, yeah,
and
definitely,
like,
yeah. You know, Abyssal Persecutor, Perfecting Obliterator.
Yeah, Obliterator's not seeing any play because, I mean, it just fails the Jace test, so.
Yeah, all these great cards that people get to play with again. And, you know, I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of that at first. And the metagame's probably going to shift when people figure out what's actually good and what's not. You know, maybe Hero of Bladehold isn't as good as people thought it was, even without Jace. Maybe it is, who knows? Yeah. So, you know, but for now, you know, people are going to have all sorts of decks. And it's really just going to give them, you know, so much play as far as, you know, what decks they're playing against, what decks they're playing with. And I think it's really good for the format.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it.
One strategy I kind of liked that I think will be really powerful just initially will be Soul Sisters, because if there's no major control deck to deal with them, the life gain and just ability to essentially gain infinite life is really powerful, and that could be around. But personally, I'm glad now because I can play Slag Fiend. I mean, Slag Fiend, you know, it fails the Jace test, and it's just really powerful card.
Really, so, the only thing holding that guy back for
seriously,
sure.
Seriously, is Jace. I mean, without Jace and Stoneforge, like Slag Fiend is ready to dominate.
Clearly, I mean, he's obviously the next Tarmogoyf.
Seriously, I mean, he's better than Tarmogoyf. He only costs 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're dead on there.
Yeah. Well, that's enough from us. Now it's time for some footage from Yada Quest, a local store in Cincinnati, Ohio, where we're going to check in with Bernie and his deck tech, where he's playing Stoneforge Mystic and Jace the Mind Sculptor in Legacy.
Both Jace and Stoneforge are seeing play in Legacy. They're both really good. I mean, you can still, you know, grab a Batterskull and still drop out a 4/4, you know, that has lifelink. So it's really good. Jace is still pretty powerful, but I don't think the demand is going to be as high.
I wasn't surprised Stoneforge was banned. It was just way too powerful when you go turn 2, Stoneforge, turn 3, Batterskull. And I think it completely warped the metagame. And I mean, even non-Cobblade decks were playing Stoneforge. Any deck playing white would play Stoneforge. Jace, I mean, he is insanely powerful, but I felt like he didn't define Cobblade. If you cut Stoneforge Mystics, Cobblade just goes back to Call Go, which kind of sucked, in my opinion. And Jace also makes a ton of decks viable. It makes blue-black playable, Rug really good, blue-white control, and blue-red Splinter Twin. It goes in a ton of decks, and it killed a ton of those decks by getting banned. But I'm not surprised because he's just that good.
Me personally, and this is something that a lot of people can do, is that I plan on keeping, I have 4. I plan on keeping 2 just around for Legacy, and then I'm probably going to use the other 2 in my EDH deck. So why not?
So initially, once Jace and Stoneforge got banned, they just started dropping in price. Everyone was trying to unload them on eBay. You can get Jace for probably like around 40 to 50, and Stoneforge for between 5 and 10. And I feel like everyone's panicking, everyone's selling out their cards, and when there's a mass amount of people selling cards, the price goes down because the market gets flooded. And I feel like after a couple months, when everything settles down and the market returns to normal, both cards will start increasing in value because of their playability and legacy, extended, and also modern or overextended, whichever the new format is going to be. Because Jace has played in every format. He's good in every format. Stoneforge played in every format except for Vintage.
Simply because of the fact that because the metagame is so big, you have a much larger card pool to select from. And when you've got equally powerful cards in all colors, which we're not far from, you're going to end up with a pretty balanced meta, and that's why Legacy is a really good format.
This is a blue-white Stoneforge Mystic Control. And it's got a Landstill base or shell with, Mishra's Factories, and it has synergy with Stoneforge Mystic, Standstill does. Because if you play Stoneforge Mystic and then Standstill, you can still vial in your Batterskulls and not break Standstill. So if you have Stoneforge Mystic, Standstill in play, you can be playing Batterskulls, be playing Manlands, and that's one way to play, and then you have Jace as a backup plan. Alright, so ever since Mental Misstep got printed, the format slowed down. Because all the aggro decks, if you were on the draw, you had to force will something, and that was just pretty bad for you. Because you're 2-for-1ing yourself. But now you have Mental Misstep, you can counter 1-drops, so it makes the games, it slows down the format, and in a slower format, Jace is playable again. Before Jace was playable, but as a 2-of, but now that you can go Misstep into Spell Snare or Daze. Daze sets you behind a land, but Misstep into Spell Snare with Forceful backup, you can easily get to turn 4 without taking much pressure. And then if you land Jace in Legacy, you pretty much just win. It's, it's blue-white just like Cobblade. It's got the Stoneforge and Jace's and Batterskull. And it just has a lot of better digging. So these 4 Brainstormers replace the 4 Preordains. You have better counter spells, free counters. And it's more controlling. It's not so much with Cobblade where aggro control. You can go aggro with this, but it's mostly control. And you only run 4 creatures, 4 real creatures, and then 4 manlands to attach stuff to. It's not too bad. I mean, you just play turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic. If you have a way to protect her, depending on what deck you're playing against. Like if you're playing against some deck that has a lot of removal, you want to make sure that you have protection for Stoneforge. But I don't think it's that hard of a deck to play. Counter the relevant spells and try to control the game. I think this is a really good deck. It's got the Mental Missteps for early game counters, and then you can go aggro, you can go control, and with any control deck, you can tune it to beat a specific matchup. which is why I like control decks. Because if you can kind of predict what's in the meta, you can tune your deck to beat it. Probably like 1,500 maybe. Maybe more, maybe a little less. 320. Yeah, like 12 to 1,500. You can probably get it on eBay for like 1,200. Just proxy it up and play test with your friends. Have them proxy up other tier 1-ish decks and just play it, and then you get a hang of it.